So right now, if you own a home in Australia, you are sitting on a financial asset that most people completely waste. In fact, the average Australian homeowner is leaving approximately $600,000 on the table. Equity that could be used to build a property investment portfolio. And the worst part, it requires almost zero additional capital to get started. Stay tuned because I'm going to show you exactly how. And later in this video, I'm going to walk you through a real case study of Sarah, who was a primary school teacher from Melbourne, who went from owning just her family home to building a 6-property portfolio in less than a decade, without a 6-figure salary, without an inheritance, and without needing to save aggressively. And it all started with one simple decision: leveraging the equity in her PPOR. By the end, you'll see exactly how the Boomerang Buyer Strategy worked for her step by step. And then you can decide if it's a strategy for you. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Aaron, and if you're new here, we break down actual property investment strategies that have worked for real Australians, not theory, not hypotheticals, but real people building wealth. Now, I want to ask you something. How many of you here own your own home? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. Look, if that's you, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes because what I'm going to share could fundamentally change your financial future. So here's the situation. You've bought your primary place of residence. Maybe it's in Brisbane. Maybe it's in Perth. Maybe it's on the Gold Coast. But you've paid off some of the mortgage. Maybe you haven't. But either way, that property has gone up in value. And that increase in value, that's equity. And that equity is just sitting there, dormant and unused. For most Australians, that equity stays locked in that one property until they retire or downsize. It's treated like some kind of sacred thing you can't touch. But here's what the wealthy investors know: that equity is a tool. It's a financial tool you can leverage to build multiple properties, multiple income streams, and multiple assets, all without needing an enormous deposit or an enormous salary. This is called the Boomerang Buyer Strategy, and it's one of the most powerful wealth building tactics available to Australian homeowners who are willing to think strategically about the equity they've already built. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how the Boomerang Buyer Strategy works. We're going to look at numbers, the timing, the structuring, and real-world case studies that proves it works. By the end, you're going to understand how to take the equity in your PPOR and turn it into a foundation of a multi-property investment portfolio. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. This strategy actually becomes easier the higher your income rises because it compounds. You're not just building one property, you're building multiple properties, and then you're using the equity from those to build more. This is how people who didn't inherit wealth still end up with multiple properties by the time they retire. So if you're ready to learn how to recycle your home equity into real investment property wealth, I want you to keep watching. So let me set the context here. We're in 2025. Interest rates have settled into a new range. Most Australian homeowners have adjusted to the mortgage environment. And while some people are still anxious about rate movements, something else is happening quietly in the background. Property values in Australian suburbs are climbing steadily. This means something really important. If you bought your home 3, 4, 5, even 10 years ago, you've accumulated substantial equity. And most people are just letting it sit. Let me give you an example to illustrate this. Let's say you bought a home in 2025 for $450,000. You put down 15% as a deposit. That's about $67,500. You've got a loan for the rest. So over the past 10 years, that property has appreciated, not dramatically, but steadily. Let's say conservatively, it's now worth $620,000. That's an increase of $170,000 in property value. Now, you've also paid down your mortgage over those 10 years. Let's say you've paid off about $80,000 of the principal. So your total equity position has grown from the initial $60,500 to approximately $250,000. For most people, that's just their home. It's where they live. The equity is invisible. It doesn't feel like money, but it is. It's $180,500 of equity just sitting in that property. And here's where the Boomerang Buyer Strategy comes in. That equity doesn't have to sit there. You can access it you can use it as a deposit for an investment property. And once you own that investment property, you can do the same thing all over again. But here's the critical bit that most people miss. To do this successfully, you need to understand the structure, because it's not just about taking equity out, it's about doing it strategically so that you can keep your PPOR, keep building equity 3, and simultaneously build a separate portfolio of investment properties. This is why I call it the Boomerang Buyer Strategy, because you're using your first property to launch into a second property, and then a third, and potentially a fourth or fifth. And each one comes back to help you to buy the next one. That's the boomerang effect. Now, the reason why this matters now in 2025 is that for years, people were hesitant. Interest rates were rising. The market felt uncertain. Investors were nervous. But what's happened is that people who bought their homes 10, 15, 20 years ago now have substantial equity. And the people who bought 5 to 7 years ago still have meaningful equity. So the pool of homeowners who can actually execute the Boomerang Buy strategy is larger than it's ever been. And the people who understand this strategy and act on it, they're building portfolio wealth, while everyone else is still debating whether the market is going up or down. So let's dive in on how it actually works. First, let's talk about the actual mechanics of releasing equity from your PPOR so you can use it as a deposit on an investment property. When you own your own home outright, or even when you still have a mortgage on it, you have equity. Equity is the difference between what your property is worth and what you owe on the mortgage. And here's the key. Banks will lend against the equity. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say your home is worth $620,000. You still owe $400,000 on your mortgage. Your equity is $220,000. Now, most banks will let you borrow up to 80% of the property value. So theoretically, you could borrow up to $496,000 against that home. Since you only owe $400,000, that means you have about $96,000 available in unused borrowing capacity against your PPOR. But here's where it gets interesting. Most people don't just borrow the extra $96,000 and then be done. They want to release more equity, and the way you do that is through refinancing. Refinancing essentially means you go back to your bank, or you switch to a different bank and you increase your loan amount. So instead of owing $400,000, you owe, let's say, $480,000. That extra $80,000 becomes available cash that you can use as a deposit on an investment property. Now, this sounds risky, right? And I understand that impulse. You're increasing the debt on your family home. That feels uncomfortable, but here's the key. And this is where the Boomerang Buy strategy is actually quite elegant. That $80,000 you borrowed is going to become a deposit for an investment property that will generate rental income. So you're not just increasing debt, you're increasing debt to buy an asset that pays for itself. Let me be specific about the numbers. Let's say you release $80,000 from your PPOR to use it as a deposit on a $500,000 investment property. You get a loan for the remaining $420,000. That property rents out at $400 per week. That's about $20,800 per year. After expenses, council rates, maintenance, insurance, vacancy, you're cash flow positive by about $120 per month. That's $1,440 per year in positive cash flow. So you've increased your PPR debt by $80,000, but you've created an asset that generates positive rental income. You're not going backwards, you're going forwards. And here's where it gets even better. As you pay down the investment property mortgage, you're building equity there too. You've got two properties now, both building equity simultaneously. Your PPR is appreciating and you're paying down that mortgage. Your investment property is appreciating and you're paying down that mortgage. Two wealth building engines running at the same time. This is the foundation of the Boomerang Buyer strategy. You're not taking on reckless debt. You're strategically leveraging equity you've already built to acquire income producing assets. Now, here's where a lot of people get confused. And this is actually crucial to understand, because if you get this part wrong, the whole strategy falls apart. When you refinance your PPOR to release equity, you need to be really clear about how that money is being used, because here's the tax reality. If you borrow against your home for personal reasons like renovating your kitchen or going on holiday, that interest is not tax deductible. But if you borrow against your home to buy an investment property, that interest becomes tax deductible. This is important because it actually makes the whole strategy work even better. And let me explain why. In the example I gave you, where you released $80,000 from your PPOR to buy a $500,000 investment property, that $80,000 of interest becomes tax deductible. Let's say your interest rate is 6%. That's $4,800 per year in interest. That's tax deductible. You're paying tax at 37%, including the Medicare levy. That's worth about $1,706 in tax deductions per year. So your net cost of releasing that equity is effectively lower because of the tax benefits. That's part of the magic here. But here's where you need to be really careful. When you refinance, you need to make sure the loan structure is set up correctly. Your bank or your mortgage broker needs to split the loan clearly. You want a loan split, one portion attached to your PPOR for your personal residence and one portion that's specifically tagged as an investment loan. This separation is crucial because it clarifies which interest is tax deductible and which isn't. Some people try to mix this up and it creates problems with the ATO later. So you want your mortgage broker or your bank to be crystal clear that they are setting up a split loan structure, PPOR on one side, investment property on the other. The reason why this matters is that once you've got this structure right, it becomes easy to repeat. You've now got an investment property. That investment property is going to appreciate over time. You're going to build equity in it. And once you've got enough equity in that investment property, you can refinance that property, release the equity from it, and use that equity as a deposit on a third property. That's the boomerang effect. It keeps bouncing. Property 1 helps you buy property 2, property 2 helps you buy property 3, and so on and so forth. This is how people build portfolios, not through heroic saving efforts, not through enormous salaries, but through strategic structural planning that allows one property finance the next one. Now, before you get too excited about the strategy, I need to address the elephant in the room. Banks care about one thing. Can you actually service the debt? Can you pay the interest and principal on the loans you're taking on? This is where a lot of boomerang buyers hit a wall. They release equity from their PPOR, they buy an investment property, the property cash flows positively, and they think they can immediately go and do it again. But then the bank says no. Why? Because the bank is looking at your total debt servicing capacity. Banks use something called a servicing ratio to work this out. Essentially, they look at your gross income and they work out what percentage of that income can be allocated to debt servicing. The exact percentage varies between banks, but as a rough guide, most banks won't want debt servicing to exceed 35 to 40% of your gross income. So let me give you an example. Let's say you earn $100,000 per year gross. That's about $7,830 per month. If the bank is using a 35% servicing ratio, they'll allow about $2,740 per month in debt servicing. Now that includes your PPOR mortgage, your car loan, any personal loans, any investment property loans. So if you're already servicing a $350,000 PPOR mortgage, you've already eaten up a significant portion of that servicing capacity. And even if you want to buy an investment property with a $420,000 loan, that's going to eat up even more. Some banks might say no. Others might say yes, but only to a smaller property. So here's the key though. Rental income from property investment properties count towards your servicing capacity. So this is where the strategy gets clearer. When you buy that investment property and it's generating $400,000 per week in rental income, some of the income counts towards your servicing capacity. So over time, as you accumulate more property investments with rental income, your servicing capacity increases. This is why people with portfolios of investment properties can keep buying, because the income from the first few properties help them service the debt on the next properties. But here's the reality. If you're earning a modest income and you want to build a portfolio quickly, servicing capacity will be your limiting factor. The strategy still works, but it works slower. You might only be able to release equity and buy a new property every 2 or 3 years rather than every year. And that's okay. It's still a powerful strategy. It's just not going to happen overnight. So this is actually why having a good mortgage broker on your side is crucial. A good mortgage broker understands how to structure your loans to maximize servicing capacity. They can position your properties in a way that optimizes your debt servicing ratio. They can shop around to different banks who might have different servicing requirements. And they can often help you access higher amounts than you could own. If you're serious about executing the Boomerang Buyer Strategy, investing in good mortgage broking advice is one of the best decisions you can make. Okay, so let's talk about timing, because this is where the Boomerang Buyer Strategy becomes truly powerful. Here's the mistake most people make. They think the boomerang buyer strategy is about getting rich quick. Release equity, buy property, immediately release more equity, buy another property, repeat 20 times in 5 years, become a millionaire. The reality is quite different. The boomerang buyer strategy is actually about playing the long game. It's about building a systematic approach where you buy one property every 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 or even 5. And you do this consistently for 10, 15, 20 years. And that's where the magic happens. Let me walk you through a realistic timeline to show you what I mean. So year one, you buy your investment property, number one. It's a $500,000 property. You've released $80,000 from your PPOR. You've got a $420,000 loan. It's cash flow positive. You're building equity. Year two, you're paying down your first investment property. You're building equity in it. You're paying down your PPOR. You're living your life. Year 3 to year 4, you've now built enough equity in your PPOR through appreciation and mortgage reduction that you can release another $80,000. You buy property number 2. Same structure, same approach. Now you've got 2 investment properties, both generating cash flow. Now we fast forward to year 6 and year 7. Property 1 has appreciated. You've paid down the principal. You now have meaningful equity in property 1. You can refinance property 1, release equity, and use that for a deposit on property 3. Meanwhile, property 2 is also appreciating in generating income. By year 10, you've bought 3 properties. Each one is worth more than when you bought it. Each one is generating rental income, and you've paid off a meaningful portion of each mortgage. Your net position is substantially stronger. But here's where the compounding effect kicks in. By year 15, you might have 5 properties. By year 20, you might have 8 or 9. Each property is worth significantly more. Each one is generating income, and the equity in all of them is creating opportunities to buy more. This is not get rich quick. This is get rich systematically. And it works because you're leveraging time, you're leveraging property appreciation, and you're leveraging multiple income streams. You're not relying on your salary to build wealth. You're using property to build wealth. So here's the beautiful part. Most people, this strategy actually becomes easier to execute the older you get because your income likely increases over time. Your servicing capacity increases and your properties are appreciating. You've got more options. So the person who starts at 30 with 1 property and buys consistently can potentially have 5 or 6 properties by age 50. That's 15 to 20 years of wealth building using the boomerang buyer strategy. Contrast that with the buyer who doesn't execute the strategy. They've got their PPOR. They've built equity in it, but that equity sits there. That person is also 50. They've got 1 property and no investment portfolio. The difference in wealth is measured in millions. Now, remember I said I talked to you about Sarah, an actual case study. Let me do that now because this shows how the boomerang buyer strategy actually works in real life. Sarah is a primary school teacher in Melbourne. She on a modest but stable income, around $65,000 per year. In 2015, she bought a townhouse in Footscray for $425,000. She put down $65,000 as a deposit. She got a loan for $360,000. She moved in. She had a family. She lived there. By 2017, 2 years later, her property had appreciated to about $460,000. She paid down her mortgage to about $335,000. So her equity has grown to $125,000. Not massive, but meaningful. Now, at this point, Sarah had a choice. She could keep building equity in that 1 property and hope for the best, or she could execute the boomerang buyer strategy. She chose the latter. She went to her mortgage broker and said, I want to release some equity. Her broker ran the numbers. Sarah's income was stable. She had been paying her mortgage on time. The property had appreciated. The banks agreed to let her refinance. She increased her loan on her townhouse from $350,000 to $405,000. That meant she released $70,000 in cash. In 2017, she used that $70,000 as a deposit on her first investment property, a small apartment in Preston, $435,000. She got a loan for $365,000. The apartment rented out for $280 per week. It was roughly cash flow neutral, maybe slightly negative after all expenses. Now, here's where I want you to pay attention. Sarah didn't panic about the slight negative cash flow. She understood that the investment property was appreciating and she was paying down the mortgage, so she was building equity. And she was comfortable with her servicing capacity because her main income covered her main expenses comfortably. Now, by 2020, 3 years later, Sarah's situation had evolved. Her original townhouse, now worth about $530,000, She paid down the mortgage further. Her apartment had appreciated to about $485,000. She paid down that mortgage too. But more importantly, her investment properties was now generating positive cash flow because rents had gone up while her mortgage repayments stayed the same. At this point, Sarah's mortgage broker recommended something interesting. She still had her original townhouse. It had substantial equity in it. The bank was willing to go further with her. But instead of releasing more equity from the townhouse, her broker suggested refinancing the apartment instead. The apartment was now worth $485,000. She owed about $375,000. That means she had $180,000 in equity. She refinanced, increased the loan to $400,000, and released $95,000 in additional cash. In late 2020, she used that $95,000 as a deposit on property number 3, the townhouse in Coburg, for $520,000. Loan of $420,000. Here's the key. By the time rentals had gone up across Melbourne, the property was renting for $320 per week. It was cash flow positive from day one. I want you to see what's happening here. Sarah's not earning $150,000 or $200,000 per year. She's a teacher. She's earning $65,000 to $75,000 a year. But by 2020, in just 5 years, she's got 3 properties worth approximately $1.5 million. She's got roughly $850,000 in total debt. She's got about $650,000 in equity. She's cash flow positive. Her income hasn't massively changed, but her net worth has transformed. And by 2025, now that we're 10 years into her journey, Sarah's situation is extraordinary. Her townhouse is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars more. Investments, multiple investments, exactly the same. She's got approximately $1.6 million in total available equity. So here's the key, right? She's done all this on a teacher's salary. She hasn't had an inheritance. She hasn't had a huge bonus. She's executed a systematic strategy where she's used the equity from each property to refinance the next one. Her rental income is now approximately $4,500 per year after expenses. That's not passive income. She still has to maintain properties and deal with tenant issues. It's substantial. And giving her options. That's the main thing. She could reduce her teaching hours. She could invest further into further education. She could travel. But what this gives her, she's got flexibility that she wouldn't have without the Boomerang Buyer Strategy. This is what the strategy actually looks like when you execute it properly over a decade. Not dramatic. It's not get rich quick, but it's systematic, it's powerful, and it's available to any Australian homeowner who understands how to structure it. Now, I need to be really clear about something. The Boomerang Buyer Strategy is powerful, but it's not without the risk. If you execute it poorly, if you over leverage, if you buy in the wrong suburbs, or if you don't maintain proper cash flow, you can find yourself in serious financial trouble. This isn't a strategy to execute on your own without proper advice. If you need a good accountant to understand the tax implications, you need a good mortgage broker to structure the loans correctly, and you need a clear investment strategy so you're not just buying properties randomly. Don't treat this as release equity and wing it approach. Treat this as a structured, professional wealth building system that requires proper advice and execution. Now, with that said, if you're willing to do it right, the Boomerang Buy Strategy is genuinely one of the most powerful paths to building portfolio in Australia. Okay, so if this video has made you think differently about the equity in your own home, that's exactly what I want. I want you to see that equity not as a sacred thing that you can never touch, but as a financial tool you can use strategically. Before you go, if you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button, because when you do, it tells the algorithm that this content is worth showing to other Australians who are sitting on home equity and wondering what they can do about it. Second, drop a comment below. Tell me, how much equity do you reckon you've got in your PPR right now? Or if you're already doing the Boomerang Buyer Strategy, tell me how many properties you've bought using this approach. I read every comment, and your answer might genuinely be the topic of our next video. And if you're not subscribed already, subscribe now, because every week we're breaking down actual wealth building strategies that work in Australia, not just theory, not hype, real frameworks, real numbers, real outcomes. Now, here's the thing. Understanding the Boomerang Buyer Strategy is one thing. Actually executing it is another, because you need to know how much equity can you actually release safely? What's your servicing capacity? Which suburbs should you focus on? How do you structure the loans for maximum tax benefit? What's the right timing for your next purchase? These aren't decisions you want to get wrong, because getting them wrong can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's exactly why we work with investors who are ready to scale beyond their PPOR. We map out your personal Boomerang Buyer Strategy. We show you exactly how many properties you could realistically own in the next decade. We help you structure the loans and navigate the tax implications. If you're interested in having a strategy session with someone who understands how to turn PPI equity into property wealth, book a call with our team. The link is in the description. Fair warning though, we only work with investors who are actually serious about executing the strategy, not people who are just curious. If you're ready to move from one property to multiple properties, let's talk. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got a lot of information from it. Thank you for watching.